So every grinder has their origin story. Some start grinding out endgames later in life. Maybe it's a stylistic thing or according to their own chess experiences, but some start very young. And Magnus, I know that you loved your endgames at a young age.
Yeah, that is true. I wasn't particularly good at endings, especially theoretical ones. I lost quite a few that I shouldn't have, and I didn't win some of the ones that I should. But I think my general positional feeling was pretty good from a young age, and that meant that that I could also play a lot of positional endgames pretty well.
Yeah, and I think we'll jump into an example of when we were both pretty young. This is a famous game. I've talked about it way too much. But it's from 2002, the World Under-12 Championship. Magnus, you were white, I was black, and it was in the final round. I was half a point behind you. And I'm guessing you don't have fond memories of this game. I thought you played pretty well, though.
Yeah, it was quite an experience. I remember the first round was delayed by like 5 hours. We played late into the evening. I played against a guy from Georgia, I think, who I'm sure nobody's ever heard of, and I don't think he became a particularly strong player. We played some isolated queen pawn position, and at some point I decided to be a little bit fancy, and I already had some advantage in that position. I decided to be a little bit fancy, and because my opponent played bishop c2 and queen d3, threatened queen h7, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to let him have this check, and I lived to regret it because he broke up in opened the position and won in the attack. So I lost the first game, but then in the next 9 rounds, I only gave a draw against Jan Nepomniachtchi, and otherwise I won all my games, which meant that I was in the lead by half a point going into the last round. But also because the tiebreak system we used was progressive score, having lost in the first round meant that I could never win by tiebreak. So I knew I had to win the last round, most probably in order to win outright. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Wow, 20 years ago, and you still remember the tiebreak score, the tiebreak system. That one slips my mind.
You weren't involved directly, so for me it's still a painful memory.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think if I won, I would have got second, I guess, on tiebreak. But yeah, I was half a point behind, and Nepomniachtchi was the other one in the running.
So the opening is typical of what I was thinking these days. Those days, I was like, yeah, I'll go knight f3, then knight c6. I don't know if I was surprised by that, but I thought, anyway, let's play the English. Why not? Because you give me the choice of the English or mainly the Chigorin or some Italian or Ruy Lopez with e4. Anyway, I think I was pretty happy to play the English in those days. So
even in those days, 20 years ago, you were happy to kind of play the longer games, right? And take the tension towards the middle game. And yeah, d4. I think I was playing this system a lot back in those days just because I didn't know anything else, essentially. But I was always struggling. And I remember...
You knew how to meet knight d5, right?
In this position.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. If I knew then, I don't know now. Let me guess.
I think this actually happened in a game between Andreikin and Kuryakin from World Blitz.
Okay.
A few years ago. And I think the game actually ended bishop g7, bishop g5, yeah. I think you're supposed to go knight c7 here. I'm not completely sure though. But what happened in the game was knight g7, now knight d4. You're already in a lot of trouble. And then I think the game concluded bishop d4, queen d4, which is a very old and fairly transparent trap, but even very strong players can still fall into it. Yeah. But I'm sure you knew how to meet knight d5.
I know that if we go back, I know that you don't meet it with knight e7.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Because of checkmate. Yeah, I mean, it does ring a bell, this line, but it's been so long, and I've avoided this like the plague ever since this game.
Yeah.
After all that suffering
Yeah.
that we will see later.
Yeah.
But yeah, 95. That would have been maybe a nasty shock. But it's different. It's more direct, right? So it's like if Black survives the next few moves, maybe he'll be okay.
And funnily, the last person that was kind of involved in this story, Jan Nepomniachtchi, I actually had something similar as Black against him many years later in the Sinkfield Cup, where we played the 4 knights instead. So knight, knight f6, g3. I decided on a whim basically to go g6, and then d4. Takes, bishop g7, bishop g2, castles. And here we played bishop f4, which I think is pretty smart. And I ended up in a miserable position that was kind of similar to the one I had as well. So I hadn't actually learned.
You didn't learn from my poor opening play in this game. So I guess after capture here, I was just playing on autopilot. These days, I might be tempted against a slightly lower rated player to play d takes d6, get the queens off the board, and try and grind this one out as Black. But
yeah, that's what I would do as well. There was a game between Caruana and David Anton from the Grand Swiss in 2019, where Fabi I think won a nice game as white. But essentially, I think Black is usually fine in this position. Black, apart from the double pawn, Black position is beautiful. It's really well coordinated, and
bishop especially, and
this bishop, the other bishop on e6, knight can come to f6, and then d7. But back then, very few people even played the Berlin.
Yeah.
Like, it's not to be too distracted here, but it's really fun to look back at how I, for instance, looked at the Berlin. Maybe not then, but like a few years later. First of all, I won all the games in Berlin as white. I would just exchange the queens, play the ending, and then I would think that I'm better. And to me, the Berlin was still kind of a gimmick that Kramnik used against Gary, because Gary couldn't play endgames. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, and that essentially wasn't a good opening, and that like the only really good opening for Black against e4 was really the Petrov. Like everything else, it was kind of worse.
No Marshall,
no. Marshall was okay, but White was usually doing well in the anti-Marshall. So those are different times completely. But okay, let's fast forward a bit.
Yeah, and that pawn structure very similar to a Berlin. I guess that's why a lot of bells go off with pattern recognition. But
I think I didn't know the opening at all, but I just played a bunch of logical moves. And here knight d5 was a nice try, but Black is still under pressure.
Yeah, I was just trying to change the trend of the game already. White has a nice bind, and that's c8 bishop.
Yeah, it's really awful. So a few things happened. Like, first of all, I'm not really sure at all about h5, but I was already thinking about having your pawn on a dark square for the ending. But bishop g4, queen e4, I don't remember exactly what I should have done. Probably there was some f4.
Yeah,
maybe there was some maybe there were tricks with d5 then. I don't remember. But I think I just missed d5. This was the thing. And when we got to the end game, although I realized I had winning chances, I was already quite upset, because I think at this point, for instance, like bishop d4 here looks very strong.
Yeah.
Then once you play d6, I can exchange everything and take on c6, and that should be a winning ending.
For example.
Yeah, for example, like this.
Yeah. It's really interesting to me that, I mean, even at that age, I mean, pushing this pawn, kind of fixing this weakness, as we'll see in a moment, but I mean, that was on your radar.
Yeah,
For 10,
but I should have made it a little bit easier. Like maybe I was worried about weakening the pawn on c5, but really bishop d4 looks so strong. Just making sure this bishop on c8 is just never gonna find any life.
Yeah, just exchanging off black's best piece, I guess, on e5.
Yeah. That probably would have given me a world championship, my first.
Gold medal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff comes with experience, though, as you
Yeah,
mentioned there.
for
now,
sure.
instinct-wise, bishop d4, exchange off black's best piece, because that's what you've learned over the years.
Yeah. So here, as far as I can remember, I was really... I think we had kind of the same thought. You were really relieved to get into this ending, and I was really upset about allowing this. Mm-hmm. In hindsight, like knowing what I know now about endings, I would think, yeah, that is a big fat weakness on h6. Mm-hmm. And pawn on d5 as well. Okay, let's calm down, calculate. This has to be at least close to a win. And I think really it's not even a difficult win. It's a pretty automatic win.
Yeah.
As we will see. So here I actually made a very natural move that I probably would have played these days as well if it was a blitz game. But here I missed the moment.
Yeah.
Here I missed the moment, and I missed having the solitary focus on putting the pawns on the right squares.
Yeah, and again, that comes with experience, and it's also that mindset thing you mentioned. Is kind of just being patient, just seeing the beauty in the grind.
Yeah.
And here, I think having looked at it a while ago, there are two winning moves, as you mentioned: putting pawns on the right color squares, putting them on light squares, fixing these guys. But also, the most direct win in this position is to just bring the white king.
And it's really remarkable how helpless black is here.
Yeah, it's actually the placement of the pieces. If black's king was already on this e6 square, maybe some drawing chances.
Yeah.
The problem is black can't bring the king because the white bishop just sneaks in behind and picks off his pawn.
If f5, then quite instructively, we can play g4.
Yes, to stop black putting pawns on light squares. And yeah, there's not much to do. Again, if an exchange, then white just comes round with the bishop. And sooner or later, the black king is going to have to give way. And I think just to test white, the best try is f4, which is very ugly, putting pawns on dark squares. But here, the winning idea is to just, exchange of pawns, get a pass for the white king. And the only thing that white needs to know, needs to figure out here is that pawn takes pawn is the only winning move. But
this is very typical. I made the weakness on h6, and now I just need to exploit it.
Yeah, and black's pieces are tied down defending it, right? So, I mean, not much to do here, to be honest. If black's bishop goes back, the white pawn steps forward, and actually this position is quite instructive. Yeah. Just Zugzwang.
It's complete Zugzwang. And it's not even mutual Zugzwang. Let's say the white pawn was an a4. You could just go king d3, and black still has no moves.
Yeah. For example, if black moves the bishop anywhere, then bishop f8 comes, winning a pawn and winning the game. And king e5 is always met by a nasty check. Yeah. And a capture here.
Yeah. Brings about another Zugzwang.
Yes. And if black's king gives way, then the white king goes this way. And it's two weaknesses. This one now is the target. So, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned there, Magnus, it's like nowadays you would stop, you'd pause, you'd reset once we reach the endgame, and you'd find the win. But that comes.
But it's very instructive, actually.
Yeah, this type of pattern we'll actually see a bit later as well in the course. But
so we'll just show very quickly what happened in the game. F4, it's logical, but now, to your credit, you found the best plan. I guess if I had time to put the king on g4, then the pawn on f5, White might still be winning here, but it's already a little bit more complicated because you want the king on f5, not the pawn there. Anyway, here now the position is just too blocked. I remember I had some hopes about bringing the king all the way around, but there just isn't anything.
Yeah. White's king just gets checked back.
Yeah, it gets checked, and this is precisely because I've fixed the pawns on the dark squares instead of the light squares. Means that I don't have room to infiltrate.
Yeah, and just one weakness this time. That was the key.
Yeah, but the story at least had a semi-happy ending in that you got a bronze medal.
Highlight of my career.
Yeah. And then Jan got first, I got second, and you got bronze. As I'm sure a lot of people who've heard the story, they know.
Yeah, and you've done pretty well since that. So
yeah, I can't complain. I can't complain.
You can let it slip. But yeah, we started young with the endgame grinding. The next game and the next chapter in my origin story was a game played when I was 10 years old, back in 2001. This game is when I truly fell in love with endgames. It took place back in the days, all that time ago, when adjournments were a thing. Those of you who've seen the Queen's Gambit will know what these are, but those not familiar with adjournments, the game was played over several sessions. So we would play, take a break, freshen up, and come back a bit later to play. So this game took 9.5 hours, and yeah, some really interesting moments, I feel, later in this game. But Magnus, you've seen the beginning of this one. We skipped ahead. We're joining from towards the end game, and it's for good reason.
Yeah, I'm just thinking this must have been a nightmare for your opponent. A seasoned FIDE master playing against some tenacious kid who's firstly making a lot of positional mistakes, then starts grinding him in an ending. Sounds awful.
Yeah, we've got those days ahead, don't worry, Magnus, where we face the up-and-coming kids who grind us down. And the first things we noticed about this position, I was white. I guess I've won a pawn using some tactics, but both kings are a bit vulnerable, let's say. It's white to play, however, and I did miss a move here. This is move 41, and back in those days, there was no increment. We weren't writing down our moves because we were low on time, and I blitzed out one more move just to make sure I'd made the time control, but I guess
because you were in time trouble as usual, yeah?
Yeah, I started young. Yeah.
Yeah.
Die hard.
Yeah, so I think in terms of candidate moves here, you start thinking about queen h4. Once you determine that that allows perpetual check, then you start looking at bishop e5 or bishop e7.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Queen c1, and white can't escape. And as you mentioned, the alternative candidate moves. This one threatening nasty little checkmate.
Yeah. And the white king hides and starts checking, so he'll have to trade queens, and then there wouldn't be much of a grind really.
Yeah.
White's only little problem here is that the knight on g5 is not really perfect. But you could, for instance, go h4 here. I think that's sort of the cleanest. Then put the knight to f4. Every single invasion square is covered, and then you can start going about winning the game. And since I think the d pawn in itself is not enough to win, but the weaknesses on d6 and a6 means that. Also, there's an extra kingside pawn, or two extra kingside pawns, in fact, compared to Karpov-Kasparov games, scenarios where black could actually hold. So it seems like it should be an easy win.
Yeah, big similarities to that classic, but unfortunately I missed this way of getting rid of black's bishop pair, which is maybe his long-term hope. So missing bishop e7, I simply retreated, hoping, of course, for queen f7 mate. And this ran into a bit of a cold shower when he retreated. And here the game was adjourned, so I had to get an envelope out, seal my move, write it down. We had a 2-hour break, if I remember correctly, and we were due to come back later. And at the time, my coach was Grandmaster Glenn Fleer, quite a well-known Grandmaster, and I remember him telling me, you just missed a win. What are you doing? But luckily, he is a bit of an endgame expert, and he just said, okay, go into this endgame. You'll find a way. The real kind of nuggets of information he gave me were a bit later on. But how would you feel here? I mean, it's not clear who's better even, right?
No, you'd be very, very worried about the prospects of black playing a5 at some point. So I'd probably just chop it off and then go bishop c7, really.
Yeah. Just to cover the square, stop black advancing. Actually, I made another mistake here, which is actually unforgivable, considering we just had an adjournment. But I think in those days, I wasn't really accustomed to the whole concept. And here black had a big move, you mentioned it, Magnus, a5, and no real risk involved, right, for black at all, because after takes, this black pawn is free to run, and black's bishop covers the promotion of white's a pawn. So
to make matters worse, the knight on g5 is vulnerable. So you could imagine a scenario where, for instance, if white goes a6, b4, you would think, well, isn't bishop d6 a nice reply? But then you get hit by bishop c1, and you just lose.
Yeah, hitting the knight and unpinning.
Which is, I think, a5 just really demonstrates the power of the bishop pair.
Yeah, and the bishop pair is a key. It's kind of the favorite kind of combination for grinders.
Yeah, it is. But, alas, it's a good thing he didn't play it, because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to show the game, and who knows, you might even not ever had the passion for grinding long endings.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you to my opponent for going into this opposite color bishop endgame that we're about to see. And
the weird thing about, I mean, to me, bishop h6 makes zero sense. Mm-hmm. Like, if you want to exchange, why don't you go bishop e7?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually, because even if white defends, I mean, firstly, now this I think is a better opposite color bishop endgame than the game.
Yeah, because there are fewer invasion squares.
Yeah, white's king can't get in, and secondly, this should have been on the radar of both of us, to be honest.
Yeah.
So okay, the next few moves, some mutual mistakes, but okay. Now he was. I just remember his body language. He was 100% convinced this was a draw.
Yeah, but this is like I think bishop f6 is a really mature decision there. Just trying to calculate which opposite color bishop ending is going to give the most chances, and understanding that it's more about it's more about the squares than straightening your structure. That's impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this one, as we mentioned, blocks the g5 square from white's king, whereas after bishop f6 now. Firstly, there's a clear path, but secondly, the black king is kept in its cage. So, okay, maybe he should go back. He should keep his bishop pair intact that he exchanged. And I mean, if we just whiz a few moves ahead, both sides played quite naturally up to here. And okay, Magnus, let's talk about how to grind. How would you approach an endgame like this? You would never give up winning chances, hopes to win a game, right? Even if it looks drawn, even if it looks
but you have clear targets here. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I would try and bring the king to g5. That would be the first target. And then try to put black in zugzwang somehow. I wouldn't be sure if I would manage, but also here as black, you wouldn't feel completely convinced that there's a fortress or anything very close to it.
Yeah, actually, if black...
For instance, if black puts the bishop on h5, that looks like a fortress, but as a matter of fact, the bishop is so short of squares there that it's still very unpleasant.
Yeah, we see that actually happen in the game in a few moves. I mean, this is a solid construction, but as you say, no more moves for this piece, and black is stuck playing with his king. Also, I remember thinking during the game, if the black a pawn was on a4, maybe it's a draw as well, because there are many lines where this pawn is a big target.
Yeah.
If white's king can break over to that side. So, okay, here I was very, very happy with myself. I thought, oh, okay, I was quite young. I learned about the concept of Zugzwang. I thought, oh, here, black can't really do much. Black has to give way. But, okay, what do you think here? Maybe is black's best bet to hold the game?
Oh, that's not an easy question, actually.
Because I think 2 moves draw and all the others lose. And yeah, it took me a long time, even afterwards, analysing this game, to realise.
I mean, I would guess king f7, d5, bishop f3 draws.
Yeah. Actually, maybe it's only 1 move, to be honest, that holds king f7. And it looks counterintuitive, right, because now this pawn runs. But as you mentioned, bishop f3, just in time. And
h5 is the only try.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem enough.
Yeah, white can create 2 passed pawns, but they're very close together. So it should be possible to stop them. So objectively, maybe this endgame is a draw, but already the pressure is on.
But again, as we discussed earlier, it's kind of beside the point. The point is that there are practical chances, and we have to make the most of them.
Yeah, it's actually funny because I think it was, 15 years after this game was played, I played against another English Grandmaster, Nicholas Pert, and we actually, with colours reversed, had almost an identical position. The pawns were slightly different on different squares, but he was 1 pawn up in an opposite colour Bishop game. He didn't even try. He just agreed to draw in something very similar to this. And again, there were ways for him to make progress and at least push, at least make me sweat. So yeah, got to learn how to grind. So black actually here made a decisive mistake. It looks very natural, blockading white's pawns, but the key now is that the white king gets in. And there's no way back now. The white king will never be caged again. So here, the second adjournment, actually the second pause in the game, happened in a moment. But here already, black is just struggling for moves. And I think just having that time to study with Glenn Fleer, my coach, helped me realise that, yeah, Zugzwang, it's key in all of these opposite colour bishop games. So black has no moves. Basically, the bishop, like you said, is stuck. The black king, if it moves, allows white to do something.
The only thing I can imagine, is this plan and then bishop f3.
Maybe the white king. I should have started.
It could be that d5 wins.
Wow, nice. Yeah. Also, for example, let me go back in this position and a check over. Yeah, just overwhelming the black pieces maybe, and this pawn drops. And
I think this one's
looks pretty convincing. Equal material, opposite colour bishops, but still winning. So this was not played in the end. He didn't give way with his king. Instead, he pushed the pawn. And okay, I forced this pawn forward, just locking in this bishop and back. And yeah, this is. I'm just going to whiz ahead a few moves. Black was trying to keep the fortress, trying to blockade on the light squares.
Now we can go and grab a6, no?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a couple of plans here. I mean, the king can just walk across and try and grab this pawn. Even then, you need to, I think you do need to be maybe slightly careful that the king doesn't get trapped on that square. But yeah, just at this moment, maybe giving a check. And I think this is an important moment because the king can go this way or this way. So in the game, my opponent went to c8. He pushed the king in this direction. But if he'd gone the other way, a few winning plans here. White can simply march across with his king, going after this pawn. And maybe black can go after the d pawn, but black's queenside pawns are likely to fall here. So there are also some Zugzwangs. I've put a lot of Zugzwang type of ideas in the notes. You guys can test yourselves at home. I definitely recommend playing through some of those exercises. You will learn a lot. Okay, so yeah, go check out some of the variations in the notes. Instead, black went this way with his king, and here after some waiting moves. Okay, Magnus, I'm going to try and test you how to break through if black just waits. Springing this on you, Cole, so sorry about that. It's not totally easy. And this was the stuff that we'd worked out in that adjournment session. I miss those days of analysing.
Yeah, really.
making me nostalgic.
Huh. So I do have the feeling that we have to triangulate somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But how?
Yeah. So we can lose time with our bishop. We can maybe move the king around in a few ways. Black is really stuck for moves. And I guess it's that theory of two weaknesses again. Black has to watch for the d pawn, but also the g6 pawn. Extremely weak.
Yeah, so let's say king f7, king here, then king f6, then there's bishop e4. Not allowing for bishop d3, h5.
Yeah, that's very nice. So h5 gives up a pawn, and then the king creeps across, and no way to stop this pawn now.
But bishop e4 still holds there. So that's a false lead.
Yep, so if we backtrack slightly to this position. So when we're thinking of grinding, I mean, for example, if this were a practical situation, what I would possibly do, just especially now there's increment, just play a few bishop moves, gain a bit of time on the clock, while your opponent thinks, try to figure out the win, try different setups, try to figure out where you want the black pieces to be. This is like my dream scenario these days. Now I'm a bit older.
Oh yeah, okay, so it's now wait a sec. I thought for a minute that the black bishop has no moves. Maybe you want the black bishop on e8 actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then you have to go king f6.
Yeah, so it has to defend its pawn from one of these two squares. So for example, king f6, force the bishop back. Makes sense. Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways here, but I think if I were a 10-year-old alone without the adjournments, I'm not sure I would have found this winning idea. And this is definitely one to pause at home on the videos.
Yeah, for sure. I'm struggling a bit as well. I think you'll just have to tell me how you did it.
Okay, let's go for it. So, I mean, there are a few ways. For example, if we backtrack to that position, you're right. You want to force the bishop to either e8 when you can trap it, or to f5. And there are ideas, like you said, of h5 at the right moment. So, for example, you could wait with the bishop.
Oh, yeah. So king f6 and then king g7. That's the way.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of... how to do this, you might have to lose a move at the right moment. So, for example, bishop here, bishop c7.
Yeah, you shouldn't allow the king to c6. So what you do is you wait.
Yeah. So maybe in this position. So, okay, I mean, one of the lines I'd worked out was bishop here. Now you kind of wait. Oh, wait. Okay, sorry, this is a hypothetical variation, but yeah, okay, king f6, let's work this out. Bishop e8, king g7. Now king d7 is met by king f8, and this bishop is trapped.
So king b7 is the only move.
King b7 is the only move. And now, okay, say we wait. King c6 and bishop c7. And I think black is in zugzwang again, because if you move the king back, the black bishop is trapped.
Yeah, so king d5 or king b7.
Yeah, king either way, and now we go forward. And bishop d7.
Then king f7 and king f6. Okay, nice.
Yeah, and this is... so basically it's forcing the black bishop to a bad square, then forcing it to this square, and now, as you say, nice, because h5 is a big threat.
Yeah.
Overwhelming this pawn on g6, which has to defend the bishop on f5, and it's simply nothing to do. Bishop d7 loses the pawn, g6, king c6, yeah, there's h5 and wins. So it's all about triangulating on these squares. And if we go back, as you mentioned, if king b7, for example, I think you can do the same thing at the right moment.
Yeah, no, you just go king f8, king f7, and then, well, now you go d7, but let's say you go to d7, black goes to d7, then we go king f7 and king f6.
Yes, and again, this bishop is overworked. If it moves away on this diagonal, really nice win. D7, give up the bishop, and promote to make the queen. So, yeah, definitely play through some of these. It's all about Zugzwang, essentially.
It is, and these opposite color bishop endings is one of my favorite conversion techniques, actually, because very often there is no counterplay. So you can see these lines like 15, 20, even more moves ahead, because you can because the lines are very easy to calculate.
It's all about visualization rather than calculation, right?
Yeah.
Black has no moves. You can just figure out how to win, where you want his pieces, where you want your pieces. And yeah, if we go back to the game just to show how it ended, he waited on this square on g4, and after bishop c5, he continued to wait, and again threatening h5 here for white, and a bit of triangulation and the killer blow, which is an idea you mentioned earlier. On move 69, white played h5, and actually my opponent resigned here because either this h pawn is running through, or after captures, then king e6, and no way to stop the d pawn. So yeah, this is the game when I fell in love with endgames and grinding.